In the medieval period, the life of a peasant revolved around the rhythms of nature, dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. As dawn broke, the day began early, often before the first light fully illuminated the fields. Peasants, typically rising at sunrise, would start their day with a simple meal, often consisting of bread and perhaps a small amount of porridge made from oats or barley, sometimes flavored with herbs or wild greens. This meal was prepared in the home, a modest structure typically made of timber and wattle, with thatched roofs and a central hearth for cooking. Following breakfast, the first task of the day was usually to tend to the animals. This would involve milking cows, feeding pigs, and ensuring that chickens were released from their coops. Livestock was integral to the peasants' way of life, providing not only food but also labor and materials. The milk from cows and goats could be turned into cheese or butter, while chickens supplied eggs. Pigs were often raised for meat, and their waste served as fertilizer for the fields. After the initial chores were completed, the family would turn to the fields. The agricultural calendar dictated the tasks that needed to be performed throughout the year. During the spring months, plowing and sowing took precedence. Peasants relied on simple hand tools, such as wooden plows, which were often pulled by oxen or horses. The plow was a crucial implement, allowing them to turn the soil and prepare it for planting. Sowing was done by hand, with seeds scattered across the prepared earth. Common crops included wheat, barley, oats, and rye, which were staples of their diet. As the seasons progressed into summer, the focus shifted to weeding and maintenance. This involved the repetitive task of removing unwanted plants that competed with their crops for nutrients. Weeding was labor-intensive and required careful attention, as a single season of neglect could result in poor yields. The peasant's day would be spent in the fields, often under the hot sun, using hand tools like sickles for cutting back growth and hoes for loosening soil. The physicality of the labor was considerable, and it was common for peasants to work from sunrise until sunset, taking only short breaks for meals. Harvest time, which typically occurred in late summer or early autumn, was a particularly busy period. Families would come together to gather the crops, often working in groups to expedite the process. They used sickles for cutting the stalks of grain and wooden carts to transport the harvested grain back to their homes. Once harvested, the grain would be threshed to separate the edible part from the chaff, often done by beating the stalks against a hard surface. This was a labor-intensive process that required many hands, and it was common for neighboring families to assist one another during this crucial time. As autumn progressed, the focus would shift again. The harvest needed to be stored properly to ensure food security through the winter months. This involved drying and storing grains in granaries, often elevated to protect from rodents. Peasants would also prepare their root vegetables, such as turnips and carrots, for storage in cool, dark places. The preparation of winter supplies was essential for survival, as the cold months would bring a halt to most agricultural activities. The winter months brought a different set of challenges. With fields lying fallow, the daily routine changed. Much of the work was now focused on repairing tools and maintaining the home. The cold weather made outdoor work less feasible, so indoor activities became more prominent. This included spinning wool into yarn, weaving cloth, and crafting items necessary for daily life. Families would gather around the hearth, where they would engage in storytelling or singing songs to pass the long evenings. Throughout the year, the peasant's life was marked by a structured routine that revolved around the seasons. The labor was hard and often backbreaking, but it was also rhythmic, with each season bringing its own set of tasks and expectations. Community life was essential, as peasants relied on one another for support, particularly during harvest time or when a family faced challenges. Villages were tightly knit, and cooperation was key to survival. Hand tools were the backbone of a peasant's daily life. Beyond the plow and sickle, other implements included spades for digging, forks for turning compost, and axes for chopping wood. Each tool was crafted with care, often passed down through generations. While the technology of the time was simple, it was effective for the tasks at hand. Peasants were skilled in the use of these tools, having learned through experience and necessity. Mastery of their craft was essential, as it directly impacted their ability to provide for their families. The physicality of their daily routines was a defining aspect of peasant life. The work was demanding and required strength and endurance. Men, women, and children all contributed to the labor, with tasks often divided by age and gender. While men might take on heavier tasks such as plowing and harvesting, women were responsible for the majority of domestic chores, including cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. Children, too, played a role, learning the necessary skills from a young age as they helped with small tasks and gradually took on more responsibility. The simplicity and repetition of their routines fostered a deep connection to the land and its cycles. Peasants were acutely aware of the changes in weather and the signs of the seasons. Their lives were intertwined with the earth, and their survival depended on their ability to read the natural world around them. The changing seasons dictated not only their agricultural practices, but also their social and cultural activities. Festivals often marked the transition from one season to another, celebrating the harvest or the arrival of spring. In summary, a typical day in the life of a medieval peasant was characterized by structured labor that was deeply connected to the cycles of nature. From sunrise to sunset, their routines were filled with tasks that required both physical strength and skill. The reliance on hand tools, the seasonal rhythms of farming, and the communal aspects of village life all played a crucial role in their existence. Though their lives were often filled with hardship, they were also rich in tradition and community, with each day contributing to the ongoing narrative of their lives and the world around them. In the heart of medieval Europe, a typical village was a microcosm of the larger feudal system, reflecting the social, economic, and spiritual life of the time. The layout of a medieval village was generally organized around a central area, often featuring a church, which served as both a place of worship and a community gathering space. The church was typically constructed from local stone, with a wooden steeple or tower, and its presence was a focal point for the villagers, symbolizing the spiritual life that permeated every aspect of their existence. Surrounding the church, one would find the homes of the villagers, arranged in a somewhat haphazard manner. These homes, often referred to as cottages, were primarily built using wattle and daub, a technique that involved weaving branches or twigs together to create a framework, which was then filled with a mixture of clay, straw, and dung to form walls. This method provided insulation and protection from the elements, while the roofs were typically thatched, made from reeds or straw, which allowed for effective water drainage and insulation. The size and construction of these cottages varied according to the wealth and status of the inhabitants. A peasant's dwelling might consist of a single room, with a central hearth for cooking and heating, while wealthier villagers, such as skilled artisans or the village clerk, might have larger homes with separate sleeping quarters. The interiors were simply furnished, often featuring a wooden table, stools, and a few essential household items. The use of textiles, such as woolen blankets or linen, was common, and many families would weave their own fabrics. Adjacent to the homes were the fields that sustained the village's economy. The agricultural landscape was typically arranged in strips or open fields, allowing for communal farming practices. Each family would have its assigned plot of land, where they cultivated crops such as wheat, barley. Crop rotation was practiced to maintain soil fertility, and the use of manure from livestock was essential for enriching the fields. The presence of livestock, including sheep, goats, and chickens, was vital for providing meat, milk, and eggs, contributing to the village's self-sufficiency. In addition to private plots, there were communal areas designated for grazing livestock, often known as common land. This communal approach to agriculture fostered a sense of cooperation among villagers, as they shared resources and labor for the benefit of the entire community. The cycle of planting and harvesting dictated the rhythm of village life, with festivals marking the changing seasons and agricultural milestones. Central to the village's governance was the manor lord, who owned the land and had significant authority over the villagers. The manor house, typically a larger and more substantial building, was the residence of the lord and his family. It often featured fortified elements, such as a stone wall or moat, reflecting the need for security during turbulent times. The lord was responsible for overseeing the administration of justice, collecting taxes, and ensuring the protection of his tenants. The manorial system established a hierarchy within the village, with the lord at the top, followed by free peasants, who owned their own land, and serfs, who were bound to the land and worked for the lord in exchange for protection and the right to cultivate their own plots. The relationship between the lord and his tenants was reciprocal. While the lord provided security and governance, the villagers were obligated to pay rents, provide labor, and fulfill other duties. Communal ovens were a notable feature of many medieval villages, serving as a shared resource for baking bread, which was a staple food. Constructed from clay or brick, these ovens required significant heat to bake loaves effectively. Villagers would bring their dough to the communal oven, where they would pay a small fee or provide a portion of their baked goods in exchange for its use. This practice not only facilitated efficient baking, but also reinforced social ties among villagers, as they gathered to share news and stories while waiting for their bread to bake. Water sources were critical to the daily life of a medieval village. Wells or streams provided fresh water for drinking, cooking, and washing. Villages were often situated near rivers or lakes, which also offered fish as a food source, and facilitated trade with neighboring communities. The proximity to water sources influenced settlement patterns and agricultural practices, as access to irrigation was essential for successful crop cultivation. The village was not an isolated entity. It was part of a broader network of trade and communication. Markets were often held weekly, where villagers could sell surplus produce, handmade goods, and livestock. These markets attracted traders from nearby towns, creating opportunities for economic exchange and cultural interaction. Additionally, seasonal fairs were significant events, drawing larger crowds and providing a venue for entertainment, socializing, and the exchange of ideas. The social structure of a medieval village was characterized by a strong sense of community, shaped by shared experiences and responsibilities. While social stratification existed, with distinctions between different classes, the reliance on one another for survival fostered a spirit of cooperation. Festivals, religious observances, and communal workdays were integral to village life, reinforcing bonds among residents and providing a rhythm to the year. The church played a pivotal role in this communal life, offering not only spiritual guidance but also a framework for moral conduct and social cohesion. The parish priest was a central figure, often serving as a mediator in disputes and a source of support for the villagers. Religious festivals, such as Christmas and Easter, were celebrated with great enthusiasm, involving feasts, music, and communal gatherings that strengthened community ties. As the seasons changed, so too did the daily routines of the villagers. In spring, the focus shifted to planting, with families working together to prepare the fields and sow seeds. Summer brought long days of tending to crops, while autumn was a time for harvesting, a labor-intensive period filled with both toil and celebration. Winter, on the other hand, was marked by a slower pace, as villagers prepared for the cold months by preserving food, repairing homes, and engaging in crafts or trades. The material culture of the village reflected the agrarian lifestyle, with tools and utensils crafted from locally available materials. Iron and wood were commonly used for farming implements, while pottery and textiles were produced by skilled artisans within the community. The production of goods was often a family affair, with skills passed down through generations, contributing to a sense of identity and continuity. In summary, the layout and features of a medieval village were deeply intertwined with the agricultural and social practices of the time. The arrangement of homes, fields, communal ovens, and churches created a vibrant community where daily life revolved around the seasons, the land, and the relationships forged among villagers. The role of the manor lord in governance and the shared responsibilities of the villagers illustrated the complexities of life in a medieval setting, revealing a world that, while challenging, was rich in culture, cooperation, and resilience. In the medieval period, which spanned from the 5th to the late 15th century, the economic life of townspeople revolved significantly around trades and crafts. The towns that emerged during this time became centers of commerce and craftsmanship, drawing individuals from rural areas seeking opportunities. The daily work within these trades was structured, reflecting the social hierarchies and economic systems of the time. Blacksmithing was one of the most vital trades in medieval towns. Blacksmiths were responsible for forging iron and other metals into tools, weapons, and household items. They utilized a variety of tools, including hammers, anvils, tongs, and bellows. The blacksmith's forge, often a central feature of a town, was typically a stone or brick building with a large hearth where the fire was stoked to heat the metal. The smith would heat the metal until it became malleable, then shape it by hammering it on the anvil. The importance of blacksmiths extended beyond crafting. They were also responsible for repairing tools and equipment, making their work indispensable to farmers and artisans alike. The apprenticeship system was a cornerstone of training for many trades, including blacksmithing. A young boy, often around the age of 12, would enter into an apprenticeship for a period that could last from 5 to 7 years. During this time, the apprentice would live with the master blacksmith, learning the trade through hands-on experience. This relationship was both educational and contractual, as the master would provide food and shelter while the apprentice learned the craft. Upon completing the apprenticeship, the individual would often be required to produce a masterpiece to demonstrate their skills before being accepted into the guild. Guilds played a significant role in regulating trades and ensuring quality within the medieval economy. A guild was an association of craftsmen or merchants who controlled the practice of their craft in a particular town. Each guild established standards for production, maintained quality control, and protected the interests of its members. Blacksmiths, for example, would form their guild, which would set the prices for goods and services and regulate who could practice the trade. Membership in a guild provided social status and economic security, as guild members often enjoyed certain privileges, such as the ability to vote on local matters or receive assistance in times of need. Another crucial trade in medieval towns was tanning. Tanners processed animal hides into leather, which was then used for various purposes, including clothing, shoes, and armor. The tanning process was labor-intensive and required specific tools, such as knives for flesh removal, scrapers for cleaning hides, and vats for soaking the hides in tanning solutions made from tree bark or other materials. Tanning was often conducted near water sources, as the process required significant amounts of water for soaking and rinsing the hides. Similar to blacksmiths, tanners also relied on an apprenticeship system. Young boys would begin their training under a master tanner, learning the intricacies of the trade, including how to prepare the hides, the chemical processes involved in tanning, and the various techniques for finishing leather. Tanners were typically organized into guilds, which helped maintain the quality of leather produced and regulated trade practices. The guild would also provide a support network for its members, offering assistance in times of illness or hardship. Weaving was another important craft, particularly in towns where textiles were produced for local and regional markets. Weavers transformed raw fibers, such as wool, flax, or cotton, into cloth. They utilized looms, which were large, complex devices that allowed for the interlacing of threads. The process of weaving required skill and precision, as the weaver had to manage the tension of the threads and the pattern of the weave. Weavers often worked in workshops or at home, depending on the size of their operation. The loom itself could vary in size, from small hand looms to larger, more complex looms used for producing wider fabrics. Apprenticeships in weaving followed a similar pattern to those in other trades, with young boys learning under a master weaver. The guild system was also present in weaving, where weavers banded together to protect their trade and ensure fair prices for their goods. Carpentry was yet another essential trade in medieval towns, encompassing the construction of buildings, furniture, and other wooden items. Carpenters utilized a range of tools, including saws, chisels, planes, and hammers. Joinery, the art of joining pieces of wood together, was a particular skill within carpentry that required great precision and craftsmanship. Carpenters often worked on site, constructing homes, churches, and public buildings, as well as creating furniture and other wooden goods for trade. Like other trades, carpentry relied on apprenticeship to pass down skills and knowledge. A young boy would begin his apprenticeship, learning to use tools, understand wood types, and master joinery techniques. Carpenters, too, were organized into guilds, which not only regulated work standards, but also provided a social framework for members. The economic life of working townspeople was influenced by the presence of these trades and crafts, with the guild system providing a structured environment for economic activity. Towns that became trade centers often saw a diversification of crafts and an increase in population as people flocked to urban areas in search of work. The interaction between different trades fostered a complex economy where goods were exchanged and markets flourished. Markets were central to the economic life of towns, with regular market days where craftsmen and merchants would sell their goods. These markets provided a venue for the exchange of not only local products, but also imported goods, as towns developed trade routes connecting them to distant regions. The proliferation of trade fairs, which were larger and less frequent than weekly markets, further stimulated economic growth. These fairs attracted merchants from various regions, allowing for the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. As towns grew, so did the demand for skilled labor. The increasing complexity of trade and the need for specialization led to the emergence of new professions and crafts. The rise of a merchant class began to alter the social landscape, creating a new dynamic between craftsmen, merchants, and the nobility. While craftsmen were often considered lower in status compared to landowners, their skills and contributions to the economy granted them a degree of respect and recognition within the community. The economic life of medieval townspeople was also influenced by broader societal factors, such as feudalism and the manorial system. While many craftsmen and tradespeople were free to operate their businesses, others were bound to the land as serfs, working for a lord in exchange for protection and the right to work a parcel of land. This relationship complicated the dynamics of trade, as serfs often had limited freedom to engage in commerce outside their obligations to their lords. In summary, the daily work of trades and crafts in medieval towns was characterized by skilled labor, apprenticeship systems, and guild structures that regulated practices and protected the interests of craftsmen. The economic life of townspeople was shaped by the interplay between various trades, market activities, and the broader social and economic context of the time. Each trade contributed to the tapestry of medieval life, reflecting the ingenuity and resilience of those who labored to build their communities. In the medieval period, the inner life of a castle was a complex tapestry of daily routines, social structures, and practical necessities. Castles served not only as fortifications but also as homes for the noble class, where the intricate workings of household management unfolded. The noble household was a microcosm of medieval society, reflecting the hierarchical nature of the time. At dawn, the castle would begin to stir as the first rays of sunlight crept over the battlements. The lord and lady of the castle typically rose early, often before the sun had fully risen. Their morning routine was simple but essential, involving personal grooming and preparation for the day ahead. The lady of the castle might have had a waiting maid to assist her with dressing in layers of wool and linen. The lord would don garments suitable for both the day's activities and the season, often adorned with the family's heraldry. As the noble couple prepared for their day, the servants would already be hard at work. The castle's household staff was organized into a hierarchy, with each individual assigned specific duties. The steward was one of the most important figures in the household, responsible for managing the daily operations, including the finances, inventory, and overall organization of the castle. The steward often had to balance the needs of the household with the resources available, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. The kitchen was a bustling hub of activity, where the cook and their assistants prepared meals for the household. The cook's responsibilities included sourcing ingredients, often from the castle's own gardens or local markets. Vegetables, grains, and herbs were cultivated in the castle's gardens, while meats were sourced from the lord's lands or through hunting expeditions. Preservation methods were crucial, especially during the winter months. Salting, smoking, and pickling were common practices to ensure that food supplies would last. The kitchen itself was a large open space, typically located in the lower part of the castle, to minimize the risk of fire spreading to living quarters. Large hearths were used for cooking, and pots and cauldrons hung over the flames. The aroma of roasting meats and baking bread filled the air, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. Meals were often hearty and rich, featuring stews, breads, and seasonal vegetables, with feasts reserved for special occasions. While the kitchen staff prepared food, other servants tended to the needs of the castle. Scullions washed dishes and cleaned the kitchen, while chambermaids maintained the living quarters. Bedrooms were often sparsely furnished, with a simple wooden bed, a chest for personal belongings, and perhaps a small table and stool. Linens were washed regularly, though the frequency varied depending on the season and the household's resources. The castle was not only a residence, but also a fortress, designed to withstand attacks. Defense considerations were paramount in the layout and daily routines of the castle. The lord and lady would often hold court in a great hall, a space that served multiple purposes for both social gatherings and defense meetings. The great hall was equipped with a large fireplace, and its high ceilings were adorned with banners and tapestries that depicted the family's lineage and achievements. The castle's walls were thick and fortified, with arrow slits for archers to defend against attackers. Guards were stationed at strategic points, and the castle's watchtower allowed for a clear view of the surrounding landscape. Training for the castle's knights was a daily affair, with young squires learning the art of combat and chivalry. Knights in training would practice their skills in the courtyard, honing their abilities with swords and lances, while also learning the importance of loyalty and honor. The routines of the day often revolved around the changing seasons and the agricultural calendar. During the spring and summer months, much of the household's focus was on planting and harvesting crops. Peasants living in the surrounding lands played a vital role in this process, providing labor for the fields and contributing to the castle's food supply. In return, they received protection and the lord's support in times of hardship. As autumn approached, the castle would prepare for the winter months, ensuring that supplies were adequately stored. Granaries were filled with grains, and root vegetables were stored in cool, dark places to prolong their freshness. The lord would often assess the state of the harvest and plan for the coming winter, which could be harsh and unforgiving. Celebrations, such as harvest festivals, would take place to mark the end of the season, bringing the community together. During the colder months, the castle's interior would become a refuge from the harsh weather outside. The great hall would be filled with warmth from the fire, and evenings would often be spent gathered around the hearth. Stories were shared, and entertainment was provided by minstrels or jesters, creating a sense of camaraderie among the household. The roles within the castle were not limited to servants and nobility. The knights played a crucial role in both defense and governance. They served as military leaders, but also as local lords, managing the lands and ensuring justice for the people. Knights were expected to uphold the code of chivalry, which emphasized virtues such as bravery, honor, and respect for women and the weak. Within this structured environment, relationships were carefully cultivated. Marriages among the nobility were often political arrangements, aimed at securing alliances and strengthening familial ties. The lady of the castle was often responsible for managing the social aspects of the household, hosting guests and ensuring that the castle remained a center of influence and power. In addition to the stewards and cooks, many other roles were necessary for the smooth operation of the castle. The chamberlain oversaw the sleeping quarters and the personal belongings of the lord and lady, while the herald managed communications and announcements. Each servant, from the lowest scullion to the highest steward, played a vital role in maintaining the household's function and reputation. As dusk fell, the castle would begin to quiet, with the sounds of the day giving way to the stillness of night. The lord and lady would share a final meal, perhaps in private or with close family, reflecting on the day's events and planning for tomorrow. The guards would take their posts, ensuring the safety of the castle and its inhabitants. The daily life within a medieval castle was a blend of labor, duty, and social obligation, interwoven with the realities of defense and governance. Each individual, regardless of their station, contributed to the castle's enduring legacy, creating a vibrant community that thrived amidst the challenges of the medieval world. The routines, responsibilities, and interactions formed a unique tapestry of life that defined the noble household, illustrating the complexities of a society deeply rooted in tradition and hierarchy. Monastic life in the Middle Ages was characterized by a strict routine, a focus on community, and a commitment to spiritual and intellectual pursuits. Monks and nuns lived in religious communities known as monasteries and convents, which served as centers of faith, learning, and agriculture. The daily lives of these men and women were governed by the rule of Saint Benedict, a foundational text that outlined the principles of monastic living, emphasizing prayer, work, and communal living. The day for monks and nuns typically began before dawn, around the hour of matins, which marked the first of the canonical hours. The day was structured around a series of prayers and liturgical services, which were punctuated by periods of work and study. The chanting of the divine office, also known as the Liturgy of the Hours, was central to monastic worship. This series of prayers took place at different intervals throughout the day, including lauds in the morning, terce, sext, and none during the day, vespers in the evening, and compline before bedtime. These prayers often included psalms, hymns, and readings from scripture, and served to mark the passage of time while fostering a sense of community among the monks and nuns. Following the early morning prayers, the monks would typically engage in their first work period of the day. This could involve various tasks depending on the specific monastery and its needs. In many cases, monks worked in the scriptoria, where they meticulously copied and illuminated manuscripts. This labor was vital for preserving knowledge during a time when books were scarce and expensive. The scriptoria housed scribes, who not only copied religious texts but also classical works of philosophy, science, and literature, thereby safeguarding the intellectual heritage of antiquity. The careful attention to detail in these works reflected a deep reverence for the written word and the importance of education within monastic life. In addition to their scholarly pursuits, monks often tended to the physical needs of the monastery. Many monasteries were self-sufficient, meaning that the monks cultivated gardens, raised livestock, and produced their own food. They grew a variety of crops, including grains, vegetables, and herbs, and engaged in animal husbandry. This agricultural work was not merely a means of sustenance, but also an expression of their spirituality, as they viewed labor as a form of prayer. The Benedictine motto, ora et labora, meaning pray and work, encapsulated this philosophy, emphasizing the balance between spiritual devotion and physical labor. The gardens of the monasteries were often meticulously organized, serving both practical and aesthetic purposes. Monks cultivated medicinal herbs for use in healing, as well as plants for culinary purposes. The knowledge of herbal medicine was preserved and expanded upon by monastic communities, contributing to the medical practices of the time. The gardens also provided a serene environment for contemplation and meditation, reinforcing the connection between nature and spirituality. As the day progressed, the monks would participate in additional prayer services at specific hours, interspersed with work periods. The rhythm of the day was designed to foster a sense of order and discipline, essential elements of monastic life. The communal meals, which were typically simple and frugal, were taken in silence, during which a reading from scripture or a spiritual text would often be shared. This practice allowed the monks to reflect on their spiritual lives while nourishing their bodies. For nuns, the daily routine was similar in structure, but tailored to the specific needs of their communities. Nuns lived in convents under the guidance of an abbess, who oversaw the spiritual and practical affairs of the community. Their days also began with early morning prayers, followed by periods of work and study. Nuns engaged in various tasks, including sewing, weaving, and preparing food, in addition to their spiritual duties. Many convents also operated schools for girls, providing education and instruction in religious and practical matters. The role of monasteries and convents extended beyond their internal communities. These institutions served as centers of learning, culture, and social services in medieval society. Monasteries were often the only places where literacy was preserved and cultivated, as monks and nuns dedicated their lives to the written word. They provided education to local children, transcribed texts, and maintained libraries, which were valuable resources for scholars and clergy alike. The preservation of classical texts and the production of new works contributed to the intellectual revival of the 12th century and laid the groundwork for the later Renaissance. Moreover, monasteries played a crucial role in the local economy. Many communities relied on the agricultural output of nearby monasteries, which often produced surplus goods for trade. Monks and nuns provided assistance to the poor, offering food, shelter, and medical care. They acted as mediators in disputes, and were often called upon to provide counsel to local leaders. The charitable works of monastic communities were rooted in their religious convictions, reflecting the Christian imperative to care for the needy. Despite their seclusion, monasteries were not isolated from the world. They were often strategically located along trade routes or near towns, which facilitated interaction with the broader community. This positioning allowed them to engage in commerce and foster relationships with local populations. Monasteries also served as places of refuge during times of conflict or instability, offering sanctuary to those in need. The decline of monastic life began in the late Middle Ages, influenced by various social, political, and economic changes. The rise of universities, the growth of towns, and the increasing importance of secular governance shifted the focus of education and social services away from monastic institutions. Additionally, the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century led to the dissolution of many monasteries across Europe, particularly in regions where Protestantism took hold. However, the legacy of monastic life endures, as these communities played a vital role in shaping the cultural and intellectual landscape of the Middle Ages. In summary, The daily lives of monks and nuns in the Middle Ages were marked by a rhythm of prayer, work, and community. Through their dedication to spiritual and intellectual pursuits, they preserved knowledge, cultivated agriculture, and served their local communities. The monastic commitment to education, charity, and communal living contributed significantly to the fabric of medieval society, leaving an indelible mark on history. The legacy of their work continues to be felt in modern times, reflecting the enduring impact of monastic life on Western civilization. In the medieval period, food and cooking practices varied significantly between the peasant and noble classes, reflecting their differing social statuses, economic means, and access to resources. The diet of the common peasant was primarily based on what could be produced locally and seasonally, while the diet of the nobility was richer and more diverse, often incorporating ingredients from far-off regions. Peasant diets were predominantly composed of bread, porridge, and seasonal vegetables. Barley, rye, and oats were the staple grains for the lower classes, as wheat was typically reserved for the upper classes. The common bread consumed by peasants was often coarse and dark, made from a mixture of grains and sometimes mixed with seeds or legumes. Porridge, a thick cereal made from boiling grains in water or milk, was a common breakfast item. Vegetables such as cabbage, onions, leeks, and peas were frequently included in their diets. Legumes, particularly beans and lentils, provided essential protein and were often grown in small plots alongside other crops. In contrast, the diet of the nobility was characterized by a wider variety of foods, including meats, fish, and imported spices. Nobles had access to wheat bread, which was lighter and finer than the bread consumed by peasants. They often enjoyed an array of meats, including beef, pork, venison, and poultry, which were either raised on their estates or obtained from hunts. Fish was also an important part of their diet, especially on fasting days, when the consumption of meat was prohibited. Nobles indulged in elaborate dishes, seasoned with a variety of spices, such as pepper, cinnamon, and ginger, which were imported from distant lands and signified wealth and status. Preservation techniques were crucial for both classes, especially in an age before refrigeration. Peasants relied on methods such as drying, salting, and pickling to preserve their food. Fish and meats were often salted or smoked to extend their shelf life, while vegetables could be pickled in vinegar or brine. Grains were stored in granaries, and root vegetables like turnips and carrots could be buried in sand to keep them fresh throughout the winter months. Nobles had the advantage of more sophisticated preservation methods, including the use of sugar, which was becoming increasingly available in the later medieval period. They could afford to preserve fruits in sugar or honey, creating jams and conserves. Additionally, nobles sometimes employed elaborate methods of preserving game meats, such as potting, where meat was cooked and sealed in a pot with fat to keep it from spoiling. Cooking practices varied greatly between the two classes, largely due to the differences in kitchen facilities and equipment. Peasants typically cooked over an open hearth in their homes, which was the center of family life. The hearth was often a simple stone structure, where a fire was maintained for cooking and warmth. Cooking vessels were usually made of clay or iron, and meals were prepared in a straightforward manner, often in one pot. The use of herbs and wild greens was common, as these could be foraged from the surrounding environment. Noble households, on the other hand, boasted larger kitchens with multiple hearths and a variety of cooking implements. The kitchens of great houses were staffed by skilled cooks who were trained in the preparation of complex dishes. Cooking was often a communal activity, with different individuals responsible for different tasks, such as roasting, baking, or preparing sauces. Noble cooks had access to a wider range of ingredients and cooking techniques, such as baking in stone ovens, which allowed for the creation of more refined and intricate dishes. Fasting days played an important role in the dietary practices of both peasants and nobles. The Christian calendar was filled with numerous fasting days, during which the consumption of meat was forbidden. These days were observed more rigorously by the religious and the nobility, who adhered to the church's regulations. On these days, fish and dairy products became staples, and meals were often simpler in nature. Fasting was not only a religious observance, but also served as a means of discipline and reflection. The quality of bread varied significantly between the social classes. For peasants, bread was a daily staple, but it was often coarse and made from a mixture of grains. The bread was dense and filling, but could be harsh on the stomach if not prepared properly. In contrast, the bread consumed by nobles was lighter and more refined, made from the finest wheat flour. This bread was often white and airier, a direct indicator of wealth and social status. The preparation of bread was an essential skill in both classes, and the act of baking was often a communal event in peasant communities, where women would gather to bake together, sharing techniques and resources. In addition to bread, other staple foods for peasants included various porridge and gruel made from grains, as well as stews that incorporated whatever vegetables and legumes were available. Meals were typically simple and unadorned, reflecting the agricultural lifestyle and the need for sustenance rather than indulgence. Seasonality played a significant role in their diet, with a reliance on what could be grown, foraged, or preserved throughout the year. Noble diets, however, were often marked by extravagance and variety. Feasts were common and served as a demonstration of wealth and power. During these events, a multitude of dishes would be presented, showcasing not only the abundance of resources, but also the skills of the cooks. Spices and exotic ingredients were used to impress guests, and the presentation of food became an art form, with elaborate arrangements and garnishes. The medieval period also saw the rise of guilds and trade networks, which facilitated the exchange of goods and ingredients. Markets in towns and cities allowed both peasants and nobles to access a wider range of foods than what was available in their immediate environments. Peasants would sell surplus produce, while nobles could obtain luxury items, including spices and sugar, through trade routes that extended across Europe and beyond. Overall, food and cooking practices in medieval times were shaped by social class, economic resources, and cultural influences. The diet of peasants was grounded in simplicity and resourcefulness, relying on locally available ingredients and preservation techniques to sustain their families throughout the year. In contrast, the nobility enjoyed a more varied and luxurious diet, reflecting their status and wealth. The act of cooking itself was a vital part of daily life, whether it was a communal gathering over the hearth in a peasant's home, or a grand feast in a noble's hall. Each meal, regardless of class, was a reflection of the time, place, and cultural values of medieval society. In medieval Europe, agriculture formed the backbone of rural life, shaping the economy, social structures, and daily routines of the population. The open field system was a prevalent agricultural practice that emerged during the early medieval period, particularly in England and parts of the continent. This system consisted of large, unenclosed fields divided into strips, which were farmed collectively by members of a village or community. Each farmer was allocated a number of strips, often scattered throughout the fields, rather than having a single contiguous plot. This arrangement facilitated the sharing of resources and labor among the villagers, fostering a sense of community and cooperation. The use of oxen and plows was essential to the agricultural practices of the time. Oxen were preferred for their strength and endurance, making them ideal for pulling heavy plows through the compacted earth of the fields. The plow itself evolved significantly during the medieval period, transitioning from the simple scratch plow to the heavier, more effective moldboard plow. This innovation allowed farmers to turn over the soil more efficiently, aerating it and making it more suitable for planting. The introduction of the moldboard plow in the 11th century marked a significant advancement in agricultural technology, enabling farmers to cultivate heavier, clay-rich soils that had previously been challenging to work. Crop rotation was another critical aspect of medieval agriculture. Farmers employed a three-field system, which involved dividing their land into three sections. One field was planted with a winter crop, such as wheat or rye, the second with a spring crop, such as barley or oats, and the third was left fallow. This practice allowed the soil to recover its nutrients and reduced the risk of disease and pests that could devastate crops. By rotating crops, farmers could maintain soil fertility and improve overall yields. This method of agriculture contributed to a gradual increase in food production, which was essential for supporting the growing population of medieval towns and cities. Livestock played a vital role in the agricultural economy. In addition to oxen, farmers kept sheep, goats, and pigs, among other animals. Sheep provided wool, which was a crucial textile for clothing and trade, while goats were valued for their milk and meat. Pigs were often allowed to roam freely, foraging for food in the woods and fields, and were typically slaughtered in the autumn to provide sustenance for the winter months. Cattle were also raised not only for their meat and milk, but also as a source of labor, as they could be used for plowing and transporting goods. The integration of livestock into farming practices created a more sustainable system, where animals contributed to the fertility of the fields through their manure, enhancing soil quality. The importance of harvests in medieval society cannot be overstated. A successful harvest was crucial for the survival of the community, as it determined the availability of food for the coming year. Harvesting was often a communal effort, with villagers coming together to gather crops. This collective activity fostered social bonds and reinforced the interdependence of community members. The timing of the harvest was critical, as it had to coincide with favorable weather conditions. Rain and sunshine played a pivotal role in crop development, and farmers closely monitored the seasons, using their observations and experience to predict outcomes. Poor weather could lead to crop failures, resulting in famine and hardship for the community. Weather patterns were unpredictable, and farmers relied on a combination of traditional knowledge and observation to guide their agricultural practices. They understood the significance of the seasons and the importance of timing in planting and harvesting. The medieval calendar was often marked by agricultural events, with festivals and religious observances closely tied to the agricultural calendar. For instance, the Feast of St. Michael in late September marked the end of the harvest season, while the Feast of St. Andrew in late November was associated with the beginning of winter preparations. Such events provided opportunities for communal celebration and reflection on the agricultural year. The open field system also had implications for land ownership and social structure. Most peasants worked on land that was part of a larger estate, owned by a lord or noble. These lords had the right to collect rents and taxes from the villagers, who in turn were granted access to the communal fields for their subsistence farming. This system created a hierarchical structure, with landowners at the top and peasant farmers at the bottom. The relationship between lords and peasants was complex, often governed by local customs and obligations. Peasants typically owed labor to their lord in the form of work on the lord's domain, which was land reserved for the lord's own use. The division of labor within the agricultural community was also noteworthy. While men generally handled the heavier tasks such as plowing and harvesting, women played a crucial role in managing the household and supporting agricultural production. Women were often responsible for planting, weeding, and tending to livestock, in addition to their domestic duties. Children were also involved in agricultural work from a young age, contributing to the family's labor force and learning essential skills for their future roles as farmers. The agricultural landscape of medieval Europe was characterized by a patchwork of fields, meadows, and woodlands, each serving specific purposes within the community. Arable land was used for growing crops, while pasture land provided grazing for livestock. Woodlands supplied timber for construction and fuel for heating, as well as resources like berries and nuts. The management of these resources was crucial for the sustainability of the village economy, as each element contributed to the overall well-being of the community. As the medieval period progressed, changes in agricultural practices emerged, influenced by various factors including population growth, technological advancements, and trade. The introduction of new crops from the Mediterranean and the East, such as legumes and various fruits, expanded the diversity of the diet and improved nutrition. Additionally, the rise of market towns created new opportunities for trade, allowing surplus produce to be sold or exchanged, further integrating rural and urban economies. The medieval open field system, with its communal approach to agriculture, reflected the interconnectedness of rural life. The rhythm of farming was dictated by the seasons and the weather, and the success of the harvest depended on collective effort and cooperation. As communities navigated the challenges of agriculture, they laid the foundations for future agricultural innovations that would shape the landscape of Europe for centuries to come. This intricate tapestry of agriculture, social structure, and environmental management encapsulated the essence of life in medieval times, highlighting the importance of collaboration, tradition, and adaptation in the face of an ever-changing world. Travel in the medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th century to the late 15th century, was a complex endeavor influenced by myriad factors including geography, social class, and the state of the roads. The vast majority of people traveled by foot, horse, or cart, each mode of transport presenting its own set of challenges and experiences. Understanding these realities provides insight into the daily lives of individuals during this time. For the common folk, travel was often limited to short distances. The average peasant might traverse only a few miles in a day, often walking along rudimentary paths that were little more than trampled earth. These paths could be muddy and treacherous, especially during the rainy seasons, making travel arduous and time-consuming. For those who could afford a horse, the journey would be quicker, but the condition of the roads still played a significant role in determining how far one could travel in a day. The roads themselves varied considerably in quality. Major routes, particularly those leading to significant towns or cities, might be maintained by local lords or the monarchy, and were often wider and more stable than lesser-known paths. However, even these roads could be poorly constructed, with potholes, ruts, and mud pits common. In some regions, road maintenance was overseen by local communities, which meant that the quality could fluctuate based on the resources and commitment of the inhabitants. In the late medieval period, the rise of trade and commerce led to some improvements in road conditions, as merchants required reliable routes to transport goods. Traveling by cart was a common sight, particularly for merchants and farmers transporting goods to market. Carts were typically pulled by oxen or horses, and could carry heavier loads than a single horse or a group of travelers on foot. However, the slow pace of these vehicles, often limited to about 2 to 3 miles per hour, meant that long-distance travel could take considerable time. The size and weight of the cart also dictated the choice of route. Many carts could not traverse steep hills or particularly rough terrain. Inns and monasteries played crucial roles in the travel experience. Inns, often situated along main roads or in towns, provided food, drink, and lodging for weary travelers. These establishments varied greatly in quality and comfort, from simple hostels with little more than a straw mattress, to more elaborate inns offering meals and private rooms. The presence of a stable was essential, as travelers often required a place to rest their horses as well. Monasteries also offered hospitality, particularly to pilgrims and those traveling for religious purposes. Monastic communities, following the rule of Saint Benedict, or similar guidelines, were bound to provide shelter and sustenance to travelers, reflecting the Christian values of charity and hospitality. A stay at a monastery often included a meal and a prayer service, providing spiritual nourishment alongside physical rest. The hospitality offered at these institutions was generally more consistent than that found at inns, as monks and nuns were committed to serving travelers as part of their religious duties. Travel times between towns and across kingdoms varied widely, influenced by the distance, road conditions, and the mode of transport. A skilled horseman could cover approximately 20 to 30 miles in a day, while a cart might manage only a fraction of that distance. For those traveling on foot, average distances could range from 10 to 15 miles daily, depending on the terrain and the individual's stamina. For example, a journey from London to York, a distance of around 200 miles, could take a traveler on horseback approximately 1 week, while a cart could require double that time or more. Certain events, such as fairs or markets, could draw individuals from far and wide, prompting them to undertake longer journeys. These occasions were not only opportunities for trade, but also for social interaction and cultural exchange. The anticipation of such events could motivate travelers to brave the often unpredictable conditions of the roads. Weather played an important role in medieval travel. Rain could render roads nearly impassable, while snow and ice in winter months could halt travel altogether. In the warmer months, travelers had to contend with dust and heat, which could lead to dehydration and fatigue. Travelers often relied on local knowledge to navigate the safest routes, as conditions could change rapidly, and they might be forced to seek shelter until the weather improved. The social structure of medieval society also influenced travel. Nobility and wealthy merchants had greater access to better means of transport and accommodations, while the lower classes faced greater hardships. For instance, a knight traveling to a tournament would likely ride a well-bred horse and stay at the finest inns, while a peasant journeying to a nearby market might walk barefoot and sleep in a barn. The disparity in resources affected not only the speed of travel, but also the overall experience. Pilgrimage was another significant aspect of medieval travel, with people journeying to holy sites for spiritual reasons. These trips could cover vast distances, often requiring months of preparation and travel. Pilgrims would typically travel in groups for safety and companionship, making their way to destinations such as Canterbury Cathedral in England or Santiago de Compostela in Spain. The pilgrimage routes, like the Camino de Santiago, were often well-trodden, with towns and monasteries strategically located to support travelers along the way. The establishment of guilds and merchant associations also influenced travel patterns, as these groups often needed to transport goods over long distances. Merchants would coordinate their travels to coincide with market days, ensuring that they arrived in time to sell their wares. This organized approach to travel helped improve the reliability of trade networks, as merchants shared information about road conditions and safe routes. As the medieval period progressed, the rise of towns and cities led to increased travel activity. Urban centers became hubs of commerce, drawing people from rural areas. The growth of marketplaces and fairs in these towns created a demand for better roads and accommodations, prompting local lords and governments to invest in infrastructure. The development of the first road regulations and the establishment of tolls for road use were steps taken to manage the flow of traffic and fund maintenance. In the late medieval period, the advent of more robust vehicles, such as the cart with a solid wooden frame and iron fittings, improved travel efficiency. Additionally, the expansion of trade networks and the establishment of postal services began to change the landscape of travel. While the majority of people continued to travel on foot or by horse, these innovations signaled a shift toward more organized and efficient means of transport. Despite the challenges inherent in medieval travel, it was an essential aspect of life during this time. The movement of people, goods, and ideas shaped societies, influenced cultures, and facilitated the spread of knowledge. Understanding the realities of travel in the medieval period provides a richer context for the experiences of individuals who navigated these journeys, revealing the resilience and determination of those who traversed the often unpredictable roads of their time. In the medieval period, festivals and holy days played a crucial role in the lives of communities, providing opportunities for socialization, religious observance, and the celebration of agricultural cycles. These events were often tied closely to the agricultural calendar, reflecting the reliance on farming and the changing seasons. The celebration of these festivals involved communal gatherings, feasting, music, dancing, and various customs that varied by region and local traditions. One of the most significant festivals in the medieval calendar was the harvest feast, which typically took place in late September or early October, marking the end of the harvest season. Communities would come together to give thanks for the bounty of the fields. The harvest feast was rooted in the agrarian lifestyle, where the success of crops was vital for survival. Villagers would celebrate the completion of the harvest with a communal meal that featured seasonal produce, including grains, vegetables, and fruits. Bread, made from the freshly harvested grain, would often take center stage, accompanied by stews made from root vegetables, and, when available, meats such as pork or poultry. Communities would decorate their tables with sheaves of wheat and corn, symbolizing the fruits of their labor. The feasting would often commence with a prayer of thanksgiving to God for the harvest, reflecting the deep intertwining of faith and daily life in medieval society. Music and dancing were integral parts of the celebration. Villagers would gather around, singing traditional songs and playing instruments such as fiddles, flutes, and drums. The atmosphere was one of joy and relief, a momentary respite from the hard work of the agricultural year. Another important celebration was May Day, also known as the Feast of St. Philip and St. James, which took place on the 1st of May. This festival heralded the arrival of spring and the rejuvenation of nature. In many regions, it was customary for communities to erect a maypole, a tall pole decorated with flowers and ribbons. The maypole served as a focal point for festivities, around which villagers would dance, weaving in and out of the ribbons, creating intricate patterns. This dance was a symbolic act of fertility and the renewal of life, reflecting the community's hopes for a prosperous growing season. May Day festivities often included a variety of foods, with fresh greens, dairy products, and early spring vegetables becoming prominent on the tables. Cheese, butter, and eggs were common, celebrating the new life that spring brought. The celebration was not solely focused on agriculture, it also had a social dimension. Young men and women would often participate in courtship rituals, and the day was marked by games and contests. Music played a vital role, with lively tunes encouraging dancing and revelry. The camaraderie of the community was palpable, as people took part in joyous activities, reinforcing social bonds. Saints' days also held a significant place in the medieval calendar. Each saint had a specific day dedicated to them, often coinciding with the anniversary of their death or a significant event in their life. These days were marked by religious observances, including mass and processions, where villagers would gather in their local churches to pay homage to their patron saints. The feast day of a saint often included a communal meal, where special dishes might be prepared in honor of the saint. For instance, on the feast day of Saint Nicholas, a popular saint in many regions, it was customary to prepare fish dishes, as he was the patron of fishermen. On saints' days, the social structure of the community was evident. The local lord or landowner often hosted the festivities, and the hierarchical nature of medieval society was reflected in the seating arrangements and the distribution of food. The wealthy would enjoy more elaborate meals, while the poorer villagers would have simpler fare, but the sense of community was paramount. The music of the day would include hymns and traditional songs that spoke of the saints' virtues, fostering a spirit of devotion and unity among the participants. In addition to these major festivals, there were numerous other local celebrations that varied by region, often tied to specific agricultural practices or seasonal changes. For example, the Feast of the Assumption in August celebrated the harvest of summer fruits, while the Feast of St. Martin in November marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter preparations. Each of these occasions offered a blend of religious significance and agricultural importance, allowing communities to come together in a shared experience. Food played a central role in these celebrations. In many cases, the dishes prepared for festivals reflected the seasonal availability of ingredients. During the harvest feast, for instance, it was common to see dishes made from freshly harvested grains, like barley or rye, transformed into breads or porridge. The use of preserved foods was also common, as communities would prepare for the winter months by pickling vegetables or curing meats. This practice ensured that they had enough provisions to last through the harsher months when fresh produce was scarce. The communal aspect of these festivals extended to the preparation of food as well. Villagers would often come together to help one another in cooking and preparing for the festivities. This cooperation fostered a sense of community and reinforced social ties. Cooking was typically a communal affair, with women often taking the lead in the kitchen, while men might engage in other preparations, such as setting up for the festivities or tending to livestock. Music and dance were essential components of medieval festivals, with each region having its own distinct styles and traditions. Instruments like the lute, lyre, and bagpipes were common, and the sounds of joyful melodies filled the air during celebrations. Dancing was often spontaneous, with villagers joining in to celebrate the occasion. The dances were typically simple and included repetitive steps, allowing many to participate regardless of skill. This communal dancing further strengthened social bonds, as it allowed for interaction between different members of the community, including those of varying ages and social standings. As the medieval period progressed, the influence of the church on festivals became more pronounced. While many festivals had roots in ancient pagan traditions, the church sought to integrate these celebrations into the Christian calendar. This blending often resulted in the incorporation of local customs and practices into the observance of saints' days and other religious festivals. For example, the celebration of Christmas incorporated many elements of pre-Christian winter solstice festivals, such as feasting and merriment, while still emphasizing the religious significance of the birth of Jesus Christ. Throughout medieval Europe, the nature of festivals and holy days varied widely, based on local customs, regional practices, and the influence of the church. While some celebrations were strictly religious, others allowed for a more secular expression of community life. Regardless of the specific nature of the festival, the communal gathering served as a vital social function, providing a sense of identity and belonging to the villagers. In conclusion, festivals and holy days in the medieval period were marked by a rich tapestry of agricultural celebrations and religious observances, allowing communities to come together in gratitude, joy, and shared experiences. These events were characterized by communal feasting, music, dance, and the reinforcement of social ties, reflecting the rhythm of life in a time when the cycles of nature dictated the pace of existence. Each festival offered a moment of respite from the daily grind, a chance to celebrate the fruits of labor, and an opportunity to strengthen the bonds that held the community together. In medieval Europe, sleeping arrangements varied significantly across different social classes, reflecting the prevailing economic conditions and cultural practices of the time. The way individuals and families prepared for sleep was influenced by their status, available resources, and living environments. Understanding these practices provides insight into the daily lives of people during this period. In rural areas, the majority of the population consisted of peasants, who lived in simple one- or two-room cottages. These homes were typically constructed from wood or wattle and daub, with thatched roofs. The interior of a peasant cottage was often dimly lit, with a central hearth providing warmth and light. Families would gather around the hearth for cooking and socializing, and it often served as the only source of illumination. As night fell, the flickering light from the fire created shadows that danced across the walls, casting an intimate yet stark atmosphere. Sleeping arrangements in these cottages were basic. The family would often share a single room, where they would sleep on straw-stuffed mattresses placed on wooden frames or directly on the floor. The straw was sometimes mixed with herbs to help repel insects and provide a pleasant scent. These mattresses were not particularly comfortable, but they offered some insulation from the cold ground. In wealthier peasant homes, mattresses might be stuffed with feathers or wool, providing a more comfortable sleeping surface. Peasants typically went to bed shortly after sunset, following the natural rhythm of day and night. The daily routine was dictated by the agricultural calendar, with early mornings reserved for labor in the fields. Children would often sleep with their parents, creating a close-knit family environment. As the night deepened, the family would huddle together for warmth, sharing body heat during colder months. In some cases, additional livestock, such as pigs or goats, might be allowed to enter the cottage at night for protection from predators and to provide warmth. Security was a significant concern for peasant families, given the threat of theft or violence. Doors were often made of heavy wood and secured with simple locks or bars. In some instances, families would place a chair or other heavy object against the door for added protection. In more remote areas, the presence of a watchman or a trusted neighbor might provide an additional sense of security. In contrast, the sleeping arrangements of the nobility were marked by greater luxury and privacy. Noble households typically occupied large stone or timber-framed castles or manor houses, which were designed to impress and protect. These homes featured multiple rooms, including designated sleeping quarters. The noble class often had access to finer furnishings and materials, reflecting their status. Noble beds were elaborately constructed and often adorned with tapestries or curtains that provided both privacy and insulation from drafts. The beds themselves were larger, with frames crafted from oak or other hardwoods, and were filled with luxurious materials such as down feathers or wool. The use of curtains allowed for a degree of privacy, which was particularly important in a household where multiple people might share a room. In some cases, a nobleman or noblewoman would have their own chamber, complete with a canopied bed and a variety of personal items, including books, writing materials, and decorative objects. Lighting in noble homes was more advanced than in peasant cottages. Candles made from beeswax or tallow were commonly used, although the latter burned with a less pleasant odor. Lanterns made of glass or metal could hold candles and were hung from walls or ceilings, providing a more even light than that of a simple candle. In wealthy households, oil lamps were also used, which provided a brighter and more reliable source of light. Noble families also had different routines when it came to sleep. While they may have retired to bed after a late evening meal and entertainment, their rising times could vary. Nobles were often able to afford to sleep in longer, enjoying the luxury of leisure. Children in noble families were also typically afforded separate sleeping arrangements, with young boys and girls often sleeping in separate rooms or chambers. In addition to the differences in sleeping arrangements, medieval nighttime practices varied greatly between classes. In peasant homes, the presence of a family unit fostered a sense of community and safety. The close quarters meant that nightly rituals often included storytelling or sharing experiences from the day. As they settled down for the night, parents would sometimes recite prayers or blessings, invoking protection for their family during the dark hours. In noble households, Bedtime routines were often more structured and formal. The presence of servants meant that nobles could enjoy a more leisurely approach to bedtime. After an evening of feasting and entertainment, servants would prepare the bedroom for sleep, ensuring that the bed was warm with hot stones or blankets. Nobles would often change into nightclothes, which were more elaborate than the simple garments worn by peasants. Nightgowns for noble women might be made of fine linen or silk, while noblemen might don soft woolen garments. As the night progressed, both peasants and nobles faced the challenges of darkness. In peasant cottages, the lack of light meant that once the fire died down, the family would often drift into sleep, relying on the natural sounds of the night to lull them. The rustling of animals outside, the wind in the trees, or the distant calls of owls would create a backdrop of nature that filled the silence. Noble families, while enjoying more light and comfort, also had to be vigilant about safety. Guards were often stationed around the castle or manor to keep watch for intruders. The sound of footsteps on gravel or the creaking of doors could stir a noble awake, prompting them to check on their family or the security of their home. It was common for noble families to have a designated watchman or guard who would patrol the grounds, ensuring that the household remained safe through the night. In terms of family dynamics, the medieval period placed a strong emphasis on the family unit. In both peasant and noble households, children were raised with a sense of duty and responsibility. In peasant homes, children would often be tasked with chores from a young age, learning to contribute to the family's livelihood. The close quarters of sleeping arrangements fostered strong bonds, as parents would share stories and impart lessons during bedtime. In noble households, while the children might have more leisure time, they were still expected to learn the skills necessary to uphold their family's status. Education was often a priority for noble children, and they would receive instruction in various subjects, including literature, music, and horsemanship. The environment in which they slept would reflect their upbringing, with a focus on discipline and etiquette. As dawn approached, both peasants and nobles would begin to rouse from sleep. The sound of roosters crowing, or the first light of day filtering through windows, would signal the start of a new day. In peasant homes, the family would rise early to begin their daily chores, often gathering around the hearth for a simple breakfast before heading out to work the fields. In noble homes, the morning routine would be more leisurely, with servants preparing breakfast and ensuring that the household was ready to face the day. Throughout medieval Europe, sleeping arrangements and nighttime routines were deeply intertwined with social class. The stark contrasts between the humble cottages of peasants and the grand chambers of the nobility illustrate the broader social dynamics of the time. While both classes faced the challenges of darkness and security, their experiences were shaped by their respective environments and resources. The rituals surrounding sleep provided a glimpse into the daily lives of those who lived during this period, revealing the complexities of human experience in the medieval world. Medieval clothing and textiles were integral to the lives of people across the social spectrum, reflecting not only personal identity, but also social status, occupation, and regional influences. The garments worn by individuals varied significantly between classes, with distinct layers and materials employed depending on one's wealth and occupation. For both men and women, clothing was typically composed of several layers. The innermost layer was often a simple undergarment, which could be a linen shift or chemise. This garment served as a base layer, providing comfort and protection to the skin from coarser outer fabrics. For men, this might be a tunic that extended to the knees, while women wore longer shifts that reached the ankles. Linen was the preferred fabric for these undergarments, due to its breathability and ability to wick moisture away from the body. Above the shift, men typically wore a tunic, which varied in length and style according to social standing and the period in which they lived. The tunic could be made from wool or linen, often dyed in various colors. Wealthier individuals might have tunics adorned with embroidery or made from finer materials. The tunic was usually belted at the waist, with the length determining whether it was worn with trousers or simply over bare legs. Women's clothing consisted of a similar tunic, often referred to as a gown. The gown featured a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt, with sleeves that could be either tight or wide, depending on the fashion of the time. Wealthy women often wore gowns with elaborate decorations, including embroidery and rich fabrics like silk, imported from regions such as the Byzantine Empire or the Middle East. The outer layer for both men and women was often a cloak or mantle, which served not only as a fashion statement, but also as protection against the elements. These cloaks were generally made of wool and could be fastened at the shoulder with a brooch or a simple tie. The length and style of the cloak varied, with some reaching the ground while others were shorter. Cloaks could also be lined with fur for added warmth during the colder months. Footwear in medieval times was simple yet functional. Men often wore leather boots or shoes, while women typically wore shoes that were either ankle-high or low-cut. Footwear was generally made from leather, which was durable and could withstand the wear and tear of daily life. The wealthy might have shoes adorned with decorative elements, while peasants wore more utilitarian versions. The process of making clothing in the medieval period was labor-intensive and required considerable skill. Most garments were handmade, often by the wearer or a family member. Women played a significant role in textile production, spinning wool or flax into yarn and then weaving it into fabric on a loom. The spinning wheel became more common in the later medieval period, enhancing the efficiency of yarn production. Dyeing fabrics was another important aspect of garment production. Natural dyes were derived from plants, minerals, and insects, with colors ranging from rich reds made from madder root to vibrant yellows from woad. The dyeing process involved soaking the fabric in a dye bath, often requiring careful attention to achieve the desired shade. Washing clothing in medieval times was done with care, as fabrics were not as durable as modern materials. Garments were typically washed by hand in cold water, often with the aid of lye or other natural cleaning agents derived from ashes or herbs. Clothes were then laid out to dry, sometimes in the sun to help bleach whites. Repairing clothing was a common practice, as garments were valuable and often worn until they were threadbare. Patching was a typical method of repair, and many households kept a sewing kit handy to mend tears or reinforce weak seams. Darning was another technique used to repair holes, particularly in woolen garments. Fastenings on medieval clothing varied with style and function. Tunics were often belted, while cloaks could be secured with brooches or ties. The wealthy might wear garments with decorative clasps made of metal or adorned with jewels. Buttoning systems became more prevalent in the later medieval period, particularly in the 15th century, as tailoring techniques advanced. Seasonal adjustments to clothing were also necessary. In colder months, individuals would layer more garments, adding furs or woolen cloaks for warmth. Lighter fabrics and shorter sleeves were favored during the warmer months. Clothing styles also shifted with the seasons, with more vibrant colors and lighter materials being preferred in spring and summer, while autumn and winter saw darker colors and heavier fabrics. The social structures of medieval society greatly influenced clothing choices. Nobility and wealthy merchants wore elaborate garments that showcased their status, often adorned with furs and intricate embroidery. Sumptuary laws in various regions restricted certain fabrics and colors to the upper classes, ensuring that clothing was not only a reflection of personal taste but also of social hierarchy. In contrast, peasants wore simpler, more functional clothing made from coarse wool or linen. Their garments were designed for durability and ease of movement, reflecting their labor-intensive lifestyles. The colors of peasant clothing tended to be more muted, as vibrant dyes were expensive and less accessible. As one moved through the various social classes, the differences in clothing became more pronounced. The clergy, for instance, had their own distinctive dress, often wearing robes and specific vestments that denoted their rank within the church. These garments were usually made of fine wool or silk, and were often adorned with religious symbols. In summary, clothing in the medieval period was a complex tapestry of social commentary, practical necessity, and artistic expression. The layers of garments worn by men and women reflected their status, occupation, and regional identity. The processes of making, dyeing, washing, and repairing clothing were labor-intensive and required considerable skill, revealing much about the daily lives and values of those who lived during this fascinating period in history. Music, storytelling, and entertainment were vital components of life in the medieval period, weaving together the fabric of daily existence across various social strata. From the bustling villages to the opulent courts, these cultural expressions offered solace, joy, and a means of preserving history and tradition. The instruments employed, the tales recounted, and the songs sung reflect the values, beliefs, and communal ties that defined medieval society. Instruments played a significant role in both secular and sacred music during the medieval period. Among the most common instruments found in village settings were simple stringed instruments, such as the lute and the viol, a type of fiddle. The lute, with its rounded body and fretted neck, was popular for both solo performances and accompaniment of singers. The viol, similar in appearance to a modern violin but with a broader body and a more resonant sound, was often played by wandering minstrels who traveled from village to village, sharing tales and music. Percussion instruments, such as tambourines and drums, were also prevalent. The tabor, a small drum played with one hand while the other hand played a flute or pipe, was especially popular among dancers and during festivities. The pipe, which could be made from wood or bone, produced a bright and cheerful sound that was well suited for communal gatherings and celebrations. In contrast, the noble courts boasted a wider array of sophisticated instruments, including the harp, organ, and various types of wind instruments, such as the shawm and the sack. But the harp, with its elegant curves and rich tones, was favored by court musicians and often associated with the nobility. It was not uncommon for noble households to employ professional musicians to entertain guests during feasts or special occasions. The organ, particularly in its early forms, was primarily used in churches, but as it evolved, it began to find its place in courtly settings as well. In the realm of storytelling, oral traditions were the primary means of sharing knowledge and entertainment. In villages, bards or storytellers would gather the community around a fire to recount tales of heroes, legends, and the exploits of local figures. These stories served not only to entertain, but also to instill moral values and reinforce social norms. The oral tradition was particularly important in a largely illiterate society, where the ability to convey history and culture relied on memory and performance. Epic poetry, often delivered in a rhythmic and musical manner, was another form of storytelling that resonated deeply with audiences. The tales of Beowulf, for instance, although originating in an earlier period, continued to be recited during the medieval era, inspiring countless adaptations and variations. These narratives were filled with themes of heroism, loyalty, and the struggle against evil, reflecting the aspirations and fears of the society that cherished them. Religious institutions also played a significant role in shaping the musical landscape of medieval life. Church music was characterized by the use of Gregorian chant, a form of plain chant that was sung in unison and devoid of instrumental accompaniment. This style of music was intended to enhance the liturgical experience, creating an atmosphere of reverence and contemplation. Monasteries became centers of musical innovation, with monks meticulously preserving and transcribing musical scores, thus ensuring the continuity of sacred music traditions. As the medieval period progressed, polyphony began to emerge, adding complexity to church music. Composers started experimenting with multiple melodic lines sung simultaneously, which created a rich tapestry of sound. This development was notably seen in the works of composers such as Léonin and Peretan in the 12th and 13th centuries. Their contributions to the Notre Dame school of polyphony marked a significant evolution in the musical practices of the time, influencing both sacred and secular music. In addition to religious music, secular songs flourished in both rural and urban settings. These songs often reflected the daily lives, struggles, and joys of common people. Themes of love, work, and the changing seasons were prevalent, and many songs were accompanied by dancing. The tradition of the round, where singers would join in a repetitive melody, encouraged participation and community bonding. Minstrels, who roamed from town to town, played a crucial role in disseminating secular music. With their repertoire of songs ranging from romantic ballads to satirical commentary on contemporary events, they provided entertainment and often served as social commentators. Their performances were a blend of music, poetry, and sometimes even acrobatics, captivating audiences in market squares and taverns alike. At noble courts, the atmosphere surrounding music and storytelling was more formalized. Courtly entertainment often included elaborate performances by trained musicians and poets. The court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance, was renowned for its patronage of troubadours, who composed and performed songs celebrating chivalry and courtly love. These troubadours not only entertained but also influenced the cultural ideals of the time, promoting a romanticized vision of love that permeated literature and social interactions. The practice of courtly love was reflected in the lyrics of many secular songs, which often extolled the virtues of a noble lady and the trials faced by the suitor. This genre of music became a significant element of courtly life, fostering a culture of admiration and aspiration among the nobility. The interplay between music and poetry during this period laid the groundwork for future developments in the arts, influencing later literary movements and musical styles. Festivals and communal gatherings provided further opportunities for music and storytelling to flourish. Harvest festivals, religious celebrations, and seasonal events were occasions for villagers to come together in joyous revelry. Music played a central role in these festivities, with dancing and singing accompanying the communal meals. The lively atmosphere fostered a sense of unity and belonging, reinforcing social bonds within the community. In addition to music, theatrical performances also emerged during the medieval period, blending elements of storytelling with dramatic presentation. Mystery plays, which depicted biblical stories, were performed in churches or public squares, engaging audiences in a visual and auditory experience. These performances were often accompanied by music, enhancing the emotional impact of the narratives. By the late medieval period, the advent of the printing press began to change the landscape of music and storytelling. The ability to produce written scores and disseminate literature more widely allowed for greater access to music and stories. This shift marked the beginning of a transition towards a more literate society, where written works could complement the oral traditions that had long prevailed. Despite this transition, the oral tradition remained a vital part of cultural life for many. Folk songs and tales continued to be passed down through generations, preserving the unique identities of various regions and communities. The interplay between oral and written traditions enriched the cultural tapestry of medieval life, ensuring that the stories and music of the past remained alive in the hearts and minds of the people. In summary, music, storytelling, and entertainment were integral to the social and cultural life of the medieval period. The instruments used, the tales told, and the songs sung reflected the values, beliefs, and experiences of people across different social strata. From the simple melodies of village life to the elaborate performances in noble courts, these cultural expressions provided a means of connection, celebration, and continuity in a world that was constantly evolving. The legacy of this rich tradition continues to resonate, reminding us of the power of music and storytelling to shape our understanding of history and culture. In the medieval period, spanning from approximately the 5th century to the late 15th century, education and literacy were largely privileges of the elite, with access heavily influenced by social class, geography, and gender. The majority of the population, particularly peasants and serfs, remained largely illiterate, as their daily lives were consumed by agricultural labor and subsistence living. The primary institutions of learning during this time were monasteries and cathedral schools. Monasteries, established by religious communities, played a crucial role in preserving knowledge and providing education. Monks were often among the few literate individuals in society, and they dedicated themselves to the study of religious texts, philosophy, and the liberal arts. They meticulously copied manuscripts by hand, ensuring the survival of classical works and the Bible. This labor was not merely about reproduction, it was a form of devotion, as the act of copying was seen as a spiritual exercise. Cathedral schools emerged in the 11th century as centers for education, often associated with the growing power of the church. These schools were typically located within or near cathedrals, and were intended to train clergy. The curriculum was heavily influenced by the teachings of the church, and focused on subjects such as grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. The language of instruction was predominantly Latin, the language of the church and scholarship, which further alienated the uneducated populace. Latin served as the lingua franca of educated individuals across Europe, despite the fact that the vast majority of the population spoke various vernacular languages. This linguistic divide meant that while educated elites could communicate across regions, the common people remained disconnected from the theological and philosophical discussions of their time. The Church's reliance on Latin solidified its authority, as the clergy maintained control over the interpretation of religious texts. In addition to monasteries and cathedral schools, some towns began to establish universities in the 12th century, such as the University of Bologna in Italy and the University of Paris in France. These institutions were initially focused on training clergy, but gradually expanded to include a wider range of subjects and students from various backgrounds. The rise of universities marked a shift in educational access, as they began to attract students from different social classes, although tuition fees still made it difficult for the lower classes to participate. Scribes were essential to the preservation and dissemination of knowledge during the medieval period. They were often employed by monasteries or wealthy patrons, and dedicated their lives to the laborious task of copying texts. The process of manuscript production was painstakingly slow and required great skill and patience. Scribes would use quills made from bird feathers, ink made from natural materials, and parchment or vellum, which were costly and labor-intensive to produce. Each manuscript was a unique work of art, often embellished with intricate illustrations and decorative initials, reflecting the importance of the text within the cultural and religious context of the time. The types of books that existed during the medieval period varied widely, reflecting the diverse interests of the society. Religious texts were predominant, including the Bible, liturgical texts, and works of the Church Fathers. However, there were also secular works, such as historical chronicles, poetry, and legal texts. The emergence of vernacular literature began in the late medieval period, with authors like Dante Alighieri in Italy and Geoffrey Chaucer in England, writing in the languages spoken by the common people. This shift marked the beginning of a gradual change in literacy and education, as more individuals sought knowledge in their native tongues. The spread of the printing press in the 15th century by Johannes Gutenberg would revolutionize the accessibility of books and education, but prior to this technological innovation, the labor of scribes and the efforts of monasteries and cathedral schools were vital in preserving the intellectual heritage of the medieval world. The dedication of these institutions laid the groundwork for the Renaissance and the eventual rise of humanism, leading to a broader movement toward literacy and education that would transform European society in the centuries to come. Throughout the medieval period, the relationship between education, literacy, and social class remained complex. While the elite enjoyed access to learning and the written word, the majority of the population remained largely uneducated. The efforts of religious institutions played a pivotal role in shaping the intellectual landscape of the time, preserving knowledge and laying the groundwork for future generations. The transition from Latin to vernacular languages in literature, alongside the emergence of universities, would eventually signal a shift toward a more inclusive approach to education, fostering a culture of learning that would continue to evolve long after the medieval period had ended. In medieval Europe, which roughly spanned from the 5th century to the late 15th century, health and medicine were deeply intertwined with the cultural, religious, and scientific beliefs of the time. The understanding of illness and healing was largely influenced by the ancient teachings of physicians such as Hippocrates and Galen, whose ideas about the body and its functions shaped medical practices for centuries. At the core of medieval medical thought was the concept of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These humors were believed to correspond to the four elements of nature: air, water, fire, and earth, and to the four seasons. Health was thought to be a state of balance among the humors, while illness arose from an imbalance. For instance, an excess of phlegm might lead to colds or respiratory issues, while an overabundance of yellow bile could provoke fevers or irritability. Physicians and healers would often prescribe treatments aimed at restoring this balance, which could include dietary changes, herbal remedies, bloodletting, or even purging. Herbal remedies played a significant role in medieval medicine. Healers, often called wise women or cunning folk, were knowledgeable about the properties of various plants and their uses in treating ailments. They would use herbs such as chamomile for its calming effects, willow bark as a pain reliever, and garlic for its reputed ability to ward off infections. These remedies were often prepared as infusions, tinctures, or poultices. The practice of herbalism was not confined to rural areas. Urban centers also had apothecaries, who sold medicinal herbs and provided advice on their use. The preparation and use of these remedies were typically informed by the principles of humoral theory. For instance, a cold and damp herb might be recommended for a hot condition, while a hot and dry herb could be suggested for a cold ailment. The knowledge of herbal medicine was often passed down through generations, and texts such as De Materia Medica by Dioscorides and The Herbal by Hildegard of Bingen played a crucial role in disseminating this knowledge. In addition to herbal remedies, medieval medicine also included surgical practices. Barber surgeons, who were often the primary practitioners of surgery, were skilled in performing procedures such as bloodletting, tooth extraction, and wound care. Their dual role as barbers meant that they also provided grooming services, which helped to blur the lines between the medical and personal care professions. The tools of the barber surgeon included scalpels, forceps, and saws, which were often rudimentary and could pose risks of infection. Bloodletting was a common practice intended to restore balance among the humors. Physicians believed that by removing blood, they could alleviate conditions believed to be caused by an excess of blood. This practice was often executed through venesection, where a vein was opened, or through the application of leeches. While bloodletting could sometimes lead to temporary relief, it also carried significant risks, including infection and shock. In terms of sanitation, the medieval period presented a challenging environment for health. Urbanization led to crowded living conditions, and the lack of effective waste disposal systems contributed to unsanitary environments. Streets were often filled with refuse, and public health measures were rudimentary at best. The understanding of disease transmission was limited, so concepts of contagion were not fully developed. Instead, Many attributed illness to miasma, or bad air, which was thought to arise from decaying organic matter and other foul smells. This belief led to efforts to improve air quality through the burning of herbs, incense, or aromatic substances. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, profoundly impacted medieval medicine and public health. This pandemic, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, decimated populations and challenged existing medical practices and beliefs. In the wake of such widespread mortality, there was an increased focus on hygiene and sanitation, as well as a greater interest in the study of anatomy and the human body. The devastation of the plague prompted some to seek out new methods of treatment and understanding, leading to a gradual shift towards more empirical approaches in medicine. Despite the limitations of medieval medical knowledge, there were also remarkable advancements. The establishment of universities in the 12th century fostered the study of medicine, and texts from the Islamic Golden Age, such as the works of Avicenna, were translated and studied in Europe. These texts introduced new ideas about medicine, anatomy, and the importance of observation in diagnosing and treating illness. Physicians in medieval times often held formal education, having studied in universities where they were taught the classical texts of Hippocrates and Galen. However, their education was not always practical, and the gap between theoretical knowledge and clinical practice could be significant. In contrast, many healers operated outside the formal medical establishment, relying on traditional knowledge and local practices. Religious beliefs also played a crucial role in medieval medicine. Many people viewed illness as a test of faith or a punishment for sin. Pilgrimages to holy sites were common, with the hope that divine intervention would bring healing. Monasteries often served as centers of medical care, where monks and nuns cared for the sick and maintained herb gardens for medicinal use. The blending of faith and medicine was a defining characteristic of the medieval approach to health. While the medieval understanding of health and medicine was limited by contemporary knowledge, it laid the groundwork for future developments in the field. The transition from a humoral-based understanding to a more scientific approach took many centuries, but the practices and beliefs of medieval medicine reflect a complex interaction of cultural, social, and environmental factors. As the Renaissance approached, the contributions of medieval scholars and practitioners would eventually pave the way for more advanced medical theories and practices. The enduring legacy of medieval health and medicine can be seen in the ways that subsequent generations built upon the foundations laid during this period, leading to the emergence of modern medicine as we know it today. The evolution of understanding the human body, disease, and healing has roots that stretch back to these formative centuries, illustrating the ongoing quest for knowledge and improvement in the care of the sick. In the medieval world, the concept of time was profoundly different from our modern understanding, particularly in the absence of mechanical clocks that would later dominate the landscape of timekeeping. Instead, people relied on a combination of natural indicators, communal practices, and religious observances to track the passage of time. This reliance on the environment and community shaped not only daily routines, but also the social structure and cultural practices of the time. The sun and the moon served as primary markers of time. Days were divided into periods of light and darkness, with the rising and setting of the sun indicating the start and end of daily activities. The length of daylight varied with the seasons, leading to a natural rhythm that dictated agricultural practices, work hours, and social interactions. For instance, during the summer months, people could work longer hours in the fields due to extended daylight, whereas winter brought shorter days that limited outdoor labor. In addition to the sun, the moon played a significant role in timekeeping. Many medieval communities observed the lunar cycle, which influenced not only the timing of festivals and religious observances, but also agricultural activities such as planting and harvesting. The phases of the moon were crucial for determining the timing of various tasks, as many believed that certain activities were best performed under specific lunar phases. For example, planting crops during a waxing moon was thought to ensure a bountiful harvest. Bells became an essential tool for marking time in the medieval period, particularly in monastic communities and urban centers. The sound of bells signaled various parts of the day, guiding the daily activities of the populace. Monasteries often established a rigorous schedule of prayers known as the divine office, which consisted of fixed hours of prayer throughout the day and night. The bell would ring to announce these prayer times, providing a communal rhythm to life. In towns, bells also indicated the beginning and end of the workday, called the curfew, and marked important events such as funerals and festivals. The church's influence on timekeeping was profound, as it not only dictated daily schedules through the liturgical calendar, but also structured the entire year around religious observances. The medieval calendar was filled with feast days, holy days, and seasons that shaped the lives of the faithful. The liturgical year began with Advent, a period of preparation for Christmas, followed by the 12 days of Christmas, culminating in the Feast of the Epiphany. Each season brought its own set of observances, and the church calendar was a primary reference point for both rural and urban communities. In addition to the liturgical calendar, the agricultural calendar was crucial for medieval life. Farmers relied on seasonal changes to guide their planting and harvesting schedules. The year was often divided into two main seasons, the growing season and the winter. The growing season began with spring, marked by the vernal equinox, which brought warmer temperatures and longer days. This was a time of preparation and planting, with specific days designated for sowing various crops. The harvest season, typically in late summer and early autumn, was a time of abundance, where communities came together to gather the fruits of their labor. The interplay between the church calendar and the agricultural calendar created a unique rhythm of life. Many feasts corresponded with agricultural milestones, such as the Feast of St. Michael, which celebrated the harvest, or the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, which often fell around the time of the grape harvest in wine-producing regions. These festivals not only provided spiritual significance, but also a much-needed break from the laborious routine of farming life. In the absence of precise timekeeping devices, the medieval populace relied heavily on natural events to mark the passage of time. Seasonal changes, such as the blooming of flowers in spring or the fall of leaves in autumn, served as indicators of the changing year. Animals also provided cues, with the behavior of birds and other wildlife signaling the shift from one season to another. People would observe the migrations of birds, the hibernation of animals, and the flowering of specific plants to gauge the time of year. The absence of mechanical clocks meant that time moved at a different pace, often perceived as slower and more connected to the natural world. Life was less hurried, and daily activities were closely tied to the rhythms of nature. People experienced time in a more cyclical manner, marked by the seasons and agricultural cycles rather than the linear progression of hours and minutes. This slower pace allowed for a deeper connection to the environment, fostering an appreciation for the natural world that shaped their lives. The use of sundials and water clocks emerged in some areas, particularly in monasteries and among scholars. These devices provided a means to measure time more accurately than relying solely on natural indicators. However, they were not universally available, and their use was often limited to specific locales, such as educational institutions or wealthy households. For the majority of people, the simple markers of sunrise, sunset, and the changing seasons remained the most reliable means of tracking time. In urban areas, the presence of a central clock tower, where one existed, became a focal point for the community. These towers, often attached to churches or town halls, provided a communal time reference that helped synchronize the activities of the townsfolk. However, even in these settings, the bells still played a crucial role in marking the hours, as the ringing of bells served as a reminder of the time, prompting people to gather for work or worship. The medieval approach to timekeeping was also influenced by social structures. Different classes and professions experienced time in varied ways. For example, peasants adhered closely to the agricultural calendar, while nobles and clergy might have had more flexibility in their schedules. The obligations of feudal relationships dictated the daily routines of lords and vassals, often requiring them to attend to their lands or fulfill duties to their superiors, which were often tied to specific seasons or events. The concept of leisure time was also different in the medieval period. While modern society often compartmentalizes work and leisure, for many medieval people, these aspects of life were intertwined. Festivals and religious observances provided opportunities for rest and socialization, punctuating the labor-intensive periods of planting and harvesting. The communal aspect of these gatherings fostered a sense of belonging and identity within the community. As the medieval period progressed, the introduction of mechanical clocks in the late 14th and 15th centuries began to alter the perception of time. These clocks, often installed in church towers and public buildings, allowed for a more precise measurement of hours, gradually shifting the cultural understanding of time from a natural and communal experience to a more regulated and individualized one. However, the transition was gradual, and for many the traditional markers of time remained relevant for generations. The medieval understanding of time was deeply intertwined with nature, community, and spirituality. People navigated their lives through the rhythms of the sun, moon, and seasons, allowing for a connection to the environment that shaped their existence. The Church's influence over the calendar added a layer of structure to timekeeping, guiding both spiritual and agricultural practices. In this world without mechanical clocks, time moved slowly, reflecting a way of life that was intimately connected to the natural cycles of the earth.